Thank you so much for having me. It's really an honor to be here, especially for this occasion, the 60th anniversary. It's been such a warm welcome. I can't even, I could go on for a while about everything that's been going on. But I really, that was such a moving beginning, David, and to meet all these people who I've only written or to corresponded with or heard from friends and I just want to thank Janani for reaching out to me and everything that she's done with the magazine now, and Debbie for just being such an amazing host and as well. And I could go on and on, but thank you to MPT. And there's really no other magazine like it in the U.S. Most of the journals of translation focused on poetry and stuff have only been around for maybe 10, 15 years actually. Stuff. There's been some older ones, but they're gone, like long gone. And so it's really amazing to see this continuing on. And thank you for the translators. So I put my photograph of a masked Trogan because I thought this would be the kind of image that's sat here for a while as the introductory, but I'm not really talking about that. I almost was tempted to talk about just birds in Ecuador, but I'm here to talk about poetry and translation and practice. So I think I'll start with, there's an epigraph to this talk by the artist Kathy Change, and she wrote this in October 22nd, 1996. And she says, "I'm taking this action out of hope, not despair. By destroying my material corpus, I want to free my spirit so that it can jump inside you." So writing on translation theory and practice, as well as its relation to different disciplines, from poetry to computer science, ethnomusicology, to linguistics, to psychology, and so on, continues to grow like the beanstalk in the fairy tale, to the degree that it is difficult to think of any discipline or any creative activity that cannot be related in some way, discreetly, directly, metaphorically, to translation. As we've learned, to translate is to carry across and through. Its vibrant roots resonate with transformation, transmutation, and movement, even the possibility of a miraculous conveyance to paradise. At the same time, when it comes to the actual practice of translation, it is still not uncommon to encounter incredulity and distrust among readers, the cliched assumption of impossibility, that something has been lost which can never be recovered, as if we were still listening to an 18th century literary critic proclaim that, quote, "the essence of a language evaporates in the translation." On the other side are those who believe, like the early Buddhist monks making their way into a new world, that every text can find its translator, and that so much can be gained and conveyed through translation, a practice that is more alchemical in its altering of languages and perceptions than mechanical, algorithmical in our hyper-technological age. The Moroccan writer and translator Abdel Fattah Khalito tells the story of the 19th century Ottoman writer and translator Ahmad al-Shidiak, who once asked by a minister of state in Tunisia if he knew French, and al-Shidiak replied, "No, sir, I did not care to learn it, for as soon as I learned the English tongue, I forgot of my own an equal amount to what I had learned. My head was destined to contain a certain amount of knowledge. If it increases on one side, it decreases on another." So Shidiak's honesty here touches on the impossibility of any individual being able to learn all the languages of the world. It is a truth we all know well, and which has opened up a vast space for the necessity of translation passed down through the ages. My own work as an editor the past 25 years has involved working on translations of prose and poetry from several languages: Chinese, Spanish, Arabic, Russian, Chuvash, Korean, Japanese, German, Swedish, French, Croatian, Albanian, Sinhalese, Dutch, Tamil, and of course, it is the translators that make this possible. As Ezra Pound said almost a century ago, English literature lives on translation. It is fed by translation. Every new exuberance, every new heave is stimulated by translations. Translation has been at the heart of New Directions Publishing from its founding in 1936 to the current front list that depends on so much on the devotion and care of many translators. I should also note, too, that in the last couple decades, a number of new independent and nonprofit presses in the US that focus on translation have been established, making this an especially active time for literary translation. But thinking about practice, a word rooted in shades of carry out, akin to our hope to carry over, and its relation to editing, writing, and translating, each intertwined with and informing the other in ways deliberate and accidental. While reading can be the fourth practice, which grounds them all. The scholar, editor, translator, and bibliophile Achilles Fang approached translation from the angle of reading and comprehension in his essay, Some Reflections on the Difficulty of Translation, published in 1959. He writes, a translator must comprehend the text when it's translating in the light of its own context as well as that of other texts. For Fang, who translated from the classical Chinese, this involved not only understanding the text itself, but also, quote, its numerous glosses, actual and possible. In other words, only after contemplating all the potential meanings of a word, a line, a stanza in the context of the poem and its relation to other possible texts could he then begin the interpretive process of translation, an especially formidable, rigorously attentive practice. One may be akin to Matthew Arnold's ideal reader of Homer being a scholar. Another essay that has stayed with me over the years also coincidentally dates to 1959. Kenneth Rexroth's The Poet as Translator. What matters most, Rexroth writes, is sympathy, the identification of another person with oneself, the transference of their utterance to one's own utterance. This act of sympathy, Rexroth refers to, isn't just a fundamental teacher of writing, the craft of words, but also enlivens one's mind and spirit. As he puts it, quote, the imagination must evoke not just a vanished detail of experience, but the fullness of another human being. This is a profound idea or ideal of poetry and its translation, this fullness of another human being that encompasses the fullness of an experience or emotion, a memory or thought, an image or scene, a dance between knowledge, intuition, and imagination as passed on through words. And what are words? If we ask Borges, they are symbols for shared memories. And what is poetry? Gifts of nature, Borges replies. And so naturally, Borges, for one, believed that, quote, an original can be unfaithful to a translation. Purushottam Lal thought of it as transcreation. That was the word he used. Basil Bunting called his translations overdrafts. The seeds for my interest in translation go back to the Tang poems we read as children in Saturday morning Chinese school in San Diego, breaking down characters and lines with language instruction. Or many years later, finding a used copy of Octavio Paz's A Tree Within and reading Elliot Weinberger's translation with the original Spanish across the page. Listen to me as one listens to the rain. Without listening, hear what I say, with eyes inward, asleep, with all five senses awake. Poetry was the hook into translation, but it wasn't until graduate school, taking a translation workshop with Weinberger and Richard Seaberth, whose introductions in his translated volumes of Hölderlin, L'Abbé, Baudelaire, the Renaissance poet Maurice Sèvres are among the most valuable sources of articulated practice for a translator, that I started to actually translate poems specifically as a way to learn more about classical Chinese poetry, its history and cultural interconnections, its music in evolving forms and traditions. This impulse to translate as a form of self-education hasn't changed for me, whether it has been co-translating the work of the contemporary Uyghur poet, Ahmadjan Osman, or diving into Mao-era Beijing through Beidao's account of his childhood in his autobiography, Citygate, Open Up. Another seeding. In an undergraduate class on world music with the ethnomusicologist Margaret Dilling, we studied the songs of the Hopi and Navajo, listening to recordings and reading translations of their poetry and music. The poetry nexus called ethnopoetics probably coined by Nathaniel Tarn, came out of the fieldwork and publications of anthropologists and coalesced around the little magazine El Chiringa, edited by Jerome Rothenberg and Dennis Tedlock in the 1970s as a way to encourage poets to participate actively in the translation of tribal oral poetry. Its distillation and expansion continued to the many anthologies Rothenberg edited, often with others like Technicians of the Sacred, Symposium of the Whole, Shaking the Pumpkin, and the multi-volume Poems for the Millennium. I was a student in Rothenberg's manifesto workshop when he was in the process of putting together the first volume of the Millennium Anthology, part of which he had made into a photocopied reader for the class. We were introduced to a poetry of other voices and other traditions, translation at the heart of a vast remapping in alternative modernity. In working on translations of some of the ritual songs of the Seneca and Navajo, Rothenberg used the phrase total translation to describe the process of translating not just words, but the whole soundscape of a poem. He writes, "Translation is a means of delivery and of bringing to life. It begins with the forced change of language, but a change too that opens up the possibility of greater understanding." One of my favorite translations of Native American poetry is the collaboration between the scholar and anthropologist Larry Evers and the Yaqui speaker and deer singer Philippe Molina in their book Yaqui Deer Songs, published in 1987. Evers and Molina intersperse ethnographic scholarship with autobiographical remembrance and include transcriptions of deer songs in Yaqui, as well as ceremonial descriptions with their translations. The Yaqui are an indigenous people who live in the Sonoran Desert from Mexico into southern Arizona. For the Yaqui, song is considered a communal language through which the experience with other living things in the wilderness world is made intelligible and accessible to the human community. It is a living tradition that stretches back beyond the Yaquis' first encounter with Spanish slave traders in 1533 and continues on to the present day through dance and music and informal and ceremonial performances. For the Yaqui, a parallel world exists to the east, quote, beneath the dawn, called the Sea Anya, or flower world, that exists as a mythic mirror image of the wilderness world of the Sonoran Desert. As part of a festive ritual performed before a hunt, a dancer takes on the spirit of a deer wearing a deer head headdress with antlers. Butterfly cocoon rattles around their lower legs, deer hoof rattles around their waist, and holding a shaking gourd rattle in each hand. The voice of the deer is carried over from the Sea Anya through the songs. Here is one song from a ceremony called Killing the Deer, where the deer, not wanting to die, is moving and talking to the wilderness world while wanting the wilderness world to talk for him. Flower-covered grove, as I am walking to you, I am talking to you, flower-covered grove. Flower-covered grove, as I am walking to you, I am talking to you, flower-covered grove. Flower-covered grove, as I am walking to you, I am talking to you, flower-covered grove. Flower-covered grove, as I am walking to you, I am talking to you, flower-covered grove. Over there, I, in an opening in the flower-covered grove, as I am walking, these enchanted bow people behind me I see. Then I see, I am talking to you, flower-covered grove. What Karl Kober has noted about Ojibwa buffalo and deer songs relates to the songs of the Yaqui, that the poem here doesn't gather its power and energy solely for itself. It is not meant as an end in itself, but instead transfers its energy and vision back into the community, the participants, and their interrelationship with the animals and wilderness in which they live. Translation here becomes a part of an opening out and into the literary tradition and rhythms of the wilderness world of the Yaquis' home. Here is a very different poem and song, one I discovered as a third-year undergraduate student living in Edinburgh, walking along the winds in the city and happening by chance upon the Scottish Poetry Library. There on a spinning metal rack, I found a postcard with a poem by the Song Dynasty poet and scholar official Su Shi, also known as Su Dongpo or Su of East Slope. The translation was titled, quote, to the tune Ling Jiangxian, and reads, drinking at night on the old east slope, adrift or drowning in wine, then heading home at what I thought was midnight. The boys asleep, his snores a distant murmur. Nothing stirs to greet my knocking. Leaning on my stick in silence, I hear once more the river's song. I'll always remember those words of yours. Your life is not your own. Then when shall I give up my plans and pretensions as dawn draws near, when the wind has dropped and the waves settled? A small boat might leave this place with all that's left of me, by river to the ocean. I'm just gonna see if this works. Okay. This postcard poem took on a talismanic aura for me that is difficult to articulate. Something to do with the time and place of its discovery, the flow of the lines that echoed the distant river, the simplicity and clarity of the midnight scene, the existential drift of the self out to sea, all heightened by the line breaks, the indents, the single stanza break after river's song. Who does this life of yours belong to, if not you? Caught in the drift of the world, as William Bronck might say. Time passed and the poetry library didn't have any information about the postcard's provenance, no record of who made them or who translated the poem. So Su Shi wrote this poem in the year 1082, when he was living in political exile in Huangzhou, a city along the Yangtze River, far to the south of the northern Song capital, Kaifeng, in present-day Hubei province. The poem isn't written in the shi regulated verse forms that were popularized during the Tang, but in a different lyric pattern called ci, or song words, that has its origin in the Sui dynasty in the late 6th century, though no ci poems of that period survive. The ci was originally a type of melody called cipai, with Indian and other Central Asian musical influences that traveled along the old silk routes with other influences from the songs of the ancient Shijing or classic of poetry, as well as the Riefu folk songs of the Music Bureau. During the late Tang, these ci songs developed into a new form of written verse, and the earliest extant examples date to this time period, when the first ci lyric anthology, Among the Flowers, was compiled by Ouyang Zhong a little later during the short-lived 5 dynasties in 940. It was during the Song dynasty, however, when the form really flourished and evolved into a popular performative verse form of irregular lines, regular line lengths, set tonal rhymes, and patterns. The famous poet Li Qingzhao, for instance, born 2 years after Su Shi's poem was written, is recognized as one of the most celebrated ci poets in Chinese letters, though this recognition came much later in the 20th century, as none of her collected literary works survived the inferno of history, and what survived of her poetry and prose were pieced together from quoted sources and anthologies. Actually, there's I think 2 new translations published in the US just in the past 5 years. Today, around 800 or 1100 known ci song patterns survive, but the original melodies to all of them are lost to time. So during the Song dynasty, these ci poems, or song lyrics, as they're often called, were performed publicly at parties and banquets and in tea shops and pleasure houses. The title noted on the postcard of Su Shi's poem, Ling Jiangxian, Ling River Immortal, refers to a particular ci melody and does not relate to the content of the poem. For the anniversary occasion of this talk, after sitting with this poem for so long and refusing to attempt the translation, I've tried for a more literal translation of the poem here. I also tried again to track down the identity of the postcard translator, this time with online success. After decades of anonymity, I can finally attribute the translator to the Canadian poet and digital theorist John Cayley, the translation appearing in his book Ink Bamboo, Poems, Translations, and Adaptations, published in 1996 by Agenda Editions. Cayley apparently used to run a small press in London called Wellsweep, maybe maybe some people here know about this, which printed the postcard as part of a series. Here is the original of Susher's poem and my rough translation. So here's you can see the Chinese on the left and the kind of irregularity of the line lengths. And then on the right is what's called pinyin, and each like word has, it's a tonal language, and so they don't really know how these poems sound anymore. But if you're kind of reading it, I don't know, in like a kind of mainlandish English Chinese accent, it'd be something like, 夜饮东坡行复醉，归来仿佛三更，家通鼻息一雷鸣. So it kind of, but how they say Cantonese actually is closer to the pronunciation of classical Chinese poetry. There's a lot of research being done, or has been done on that, but Cantonese having more tones than Mandarin. But the next slide, so to the left is Kaylee's translation that I had read, and I'll just read you this kind of more literal version. Returning to Lingao at night drinking, east slope, awake then drunk again, heading back late, somewhere around midnight, the boys breathing, already thunder, raps on the door, no one replies, leaning on a stick, listening to the sound of the river. Remorse runs deep, this life is not mine. When will the ceaseless buzzing and hustling become a forgotten memory? Late in the night, the wind dies down, waves calm, mirror stillness. A small boat passes away from here, by river to the sea, with what's left of me. So one way Susher made the Zi form his own was by including bits of his own biography and experiences into his songs. So Lingao refers to his temporary abode on the riverbank. East Slope in the first line refers to the place of his exile, as well as the literary name he gave himself during this time. Kaylee makes some lyrical additions with personal pronouns, prepositions, and phrases not present in the original. Adrift or drowning is one example. The first line of the second stanza is particularly tricky, and Kaylee makes an interpretive leap with the wholly imagined addition of, I'll always remember those words of yours. This line is the only place in the original poem where the lone pronoun, I, my, mine, directly appears. The phrase ing ing in line 7 carries different shades of meaning in the context of the poem. The character ing can refer to an army camp or barracks, recalling the location of Susher's banishment. Doubled as ing ing, the word refers iconistically and kind of onomatopoetically for the busy buzzing of flies. Having spent so many years with the magic of Kaylee's poem, it was hard for me to attempt what still feels like an unfinished translation to me, though I've tried to echo the ebb and flow of the original, while allowing the coincidence of meaning and perception to shine through the prosody, as if trying to hear a long-forgotten song. So before turning to another poem Susher wrote during this time of exile, I thought I'd share a poem of mine where the lyric impulse directly involves a writing through translation, where translation is at the heart of a poem's composition and layered meanings. Elegy for Ling is from my book Vanishing Line. The word Ling here refers to a woman's name. As part of the poem title, I've included the Chinese character for this word in both its traditional or complex form as well in its simplified form, as visually they are very different from each other. So, oh, this works. So here. As some of you know, classical Chinese literature was written in what is called complex characters, which are still used in everyday life in Taiwan, Macau, and Hong Kong. The simplification of written characters dates back to at least the 3rd century BC, but is largely associated with the massive simplification initiatives that started in the 20th century on the mainland and through the era of the People's Republic to the present. as part of the movement to increase literacy. Each logogram is made up of different radicals or individual visual, semantic, and phonetic components that carry different meanings. So I'll just going to read the beginning of this poem because it's longer. But so Elegy for Ling. Spirit consumed by fire, shaman warps to pig's head, rain above open mouths, doorway between shaman and rainfall. Ling, heart tone of the temple gate of the zero moon, echo of jade brilliance, red phosphorus spirit, spirit of being, unmaking Ling. Soul dim, light flitting, eve splitting, Maboroshi light, will-o'-the-wisp, drawing her nearer, across wet distances, darknesses, Ling. Beyond the waste mountains, water streaming stones, that sound of water against stones, of jade pendants, of bells, of antelope horns among branches, of damask, of feathers, of the creaking wheel, Ling, unrecognizable behind the lattice, pages and pages floating down, scales, scars tearing apart, heart, sliver of light, ice, prison, to the measured position of the cracking entablature at the architrave's cusp, crumbling beneath her, Ling, looking down on the ruined city of her birth, facing the unraveling, the expanding, the contracting, the pull of the end, that night before the wedding, before her arrival. So in this poem, the kind of deconstruction of the radical components of the Chinese character Ling is intertwined with the myriad meanings of other homophonic rhyme words and their tonal variations. Shards of biographical and historical material are also woven into the broken down meanings. The traditional character for Ling, this one here, is composed of three horizontal layers of Chinese characters. The top, the word for rain, yu. The middle, the character ko, repeated 3 times in a row. Ko meaning mouth or opening or entrance or gate. And the bottom, wu, which refers to a particular ancient female shaman, and this is wu. It is recorded that the official Guan Yifu once said to King Zhao of Chu in the late 5th century BC, quote, "It is they, the Wu shamans, who were charged with determining the dwelling places of the gods, the proper positions in sacrificial rituals, and the hierarchical order among them, so that the descendants of the ancient divine ones would be blessed. They also knew the names and locations of the important mountains and rivers, the ancestors of the ruling house, the management of the affairs of its ancestral temple, as well as the family lineage generated as the family lineage generation by generation." And so this image here is a painted, found on a zither excavated from a tomb in Chu that is thought to represent a Wu shaman. So sound, form, meaning, rhythm, the alchemy of poetry and its translation. "I want to free my spirit," Kathy Change wrote, "so that it can jump inside you." Or here is Samuel Butler in The Way of All Flesh, talking about crossing, which here could be a stand-in for translation. "Seeing is a mode of touching. Touching is a mode of feeding. Feeding is a mode of assimilation. Assimilation is a mode of recreation and reproduction, and this is crossing, shaking yourself into something else and something else into you." Can translation be thought of as a process of reverse assimilation? So in the second year of Su Shi's exile in Huangzhou in 1081, he was given a plot of land to farm, a former military camp, as he and his family were short on food. There he wrote a cycle of 8 poems with a short preface about this experience, merging the cultivation of the earth with the cultivation of words and the self. The plow as a brush, the brush a plow. The poems are a loose asymmetrical variation on the 5-character rhythmic regulated verse style, each poem carrying a varying number of lines with the same rhyming syllable carried through the poem at the end of each couplet, and a slight caesura falling after the second character in each line. I first translated the cycle of poems in the graduate workshop with Sieberth and Weinberger, and later on it was published as a chapbook by Ugly Duckling Press with archival photographs from the Library of Congress Farm Security Administration Archive, an archive of thousands of photographs by Dorothea Lange, Walker Evans, and others commissioned by the US government in the 30s and 40s. And this is the title page of that chapbook. And the people, the editors at the time there, one of them was working in the New York Public Library image archive, and it was like, hey, why don't we use these? And it really seemed to work for us. So here is the 4th poem in the series. And let me read this, but in the first line, there's this phrase, Qingming, which maybe some of you have heard. And Qingming, it falls, it's after spring equinox. It can be translated as like clear brightness. It's like a festival, like tomb sweeping. So like even my family, my mother and we all go to the grave that day, or we used to when we were all together, because a lot of my family is buried there. And we go and we kind of clean the grave site and make some offerings and things. So this is the 4th poem. Sow rice before Qingming, joys I can number. Feather rains dim, spring swales. Water needle shoots bring good news. Seedlings planted by early summer. Delight grows as wind blows leaf stalks. Moon bright, watch the dew, one by one, beads strung on thread. Fall comes, grain ears heavy with frost. Topple, brace each other. Yet among fields, dikes, here grasshoppers like wind, rain, fresh rice husked, then poured into earthen pots. Jade grains glimmer in baskets. Long have I eaten from government granaries, red with rot, no better than dirt, this familiar taste food I've been used to. So Robert Burns once described the practice of poetry as the united effort of pains, attention, and repeated trial. Through such a united trifecta, the form of this translation slowly materialized. The lines and spacing of the translation were inspired in part by the art of Chinese landscape painting, calligraphy, and stone stamp carving, where emptiness is an active element of the aesthetic design, the dragon hiding behind the clouds. And you can see that the original layout of the poem on the page is itself shaped like a rectangular field, given the equal number of characters that make up each line and the absence of punctuation. I've tried to echo this visual field or seal with the translation, incorporating irregular spaces between certain words and phrases that also serve as rhythmic and lyrical elements of breath and pauses. It's an elastic, somewhat forgiving form that I've used to translate other classical verse, including an anthology compiled during the Song Dynasty called the Qianjia Shi. As Herlin once wrote to a friend, "You are right, translation is like gymnastics and does the language a lot of good. It becomes nice and flexible when it has to adapt to foreign beauty and grandeur, and often to foreign whims too." Over 20 years after translating East Slope, I adapted this field-like form for a series of poems I wrote in collaboration with the artist Kazumi Tanaka. Oh, yeah, I forgot I put this in. Tanaka had created an album of 12 drawings, each on a 10 by 10 inch square sheet made with the ink steeped from various tea leaves. The drawings were of certain memories, stories, and dreams from her childhood in Osaka and centered around her mother and the house she grew up in. The detailed simplicity and finely measured strokes, the shifts in perspective and distance, the repetition of certain ritual objects, the specificity of the flowers, the changing position of the image on the square sheet surrounded by emptiness, All of these aspects reminded me of the double leaf butterfly mounting of the classical Chinese album. And this is an example of that from the 17th century. And this particular one by Shitao was a big inspiration for me, which I write about elsewhere for this project that we were doing with Tanaka. Tanaka and I were doing together. It sparked the idea of using the plow field of East Slope for the form of the poems. The opening of the field initiating the opening of the poems, 12 poems threaded together with the images to make a renga-like whole, the end of each poem foretelling the image that follows it, and each poem dwelling on the image before it, plus a little 3-line poem to open the album. Each poem was translated into Japanese by Hiroki Sato, who to complete the circle back home linguistically, and back to the first image, which was a bird's nest. And so here's just one poem from the sequence, and it's titled No Home, Go Home, Go Home, No Home, along with its Japanese translation and the 2 images that surround it as they appear in my book, Line and Light. So this would be kind of the image that comes first. And they are all, again, like I mentioned, they're all, the T that she used is noted as well. To arrange the stones at the fountain basin, close your eyes and scatter them. Water drops ring out underground. Slow, fast, slow, nature's kodo. Listening to the silence of the girl, her close-up quietness. No face, no eyes, no nose, no mouth. Only her hair shines with emptiness, figuring her presence in the plant that must wither under sun before it can release the dragon. Freshly cut bob, combed, waved to streaked strands, more alive than flesh, fades strand by strand. What spirit resides in your hair? Kami deity, where the 8-fold clouds rise with vitality. Who are you ingrained in the cells, singing a song of the East, though still in the land of the West? Encoding markers, making memory open the garden gate to face a sunflower in fluorescence. And so this would be the image that follows with the sunflower. And I just wanted to, this is the last image. So Kazumi, when we finished this, it was a long process, but we had sent some of them to the Paris Review, and they published half of the work with the images, and Kazumi's mother at the time, which was such an inspiration for the whole project, Kazumi starting the kind of drawings, was in the hospital, and so she was able to see the publication of it before she passed away, and then she was supposed to go to Osaka again because they had to deal with the family house, her and a couple of her siblings, and she was supposed to get there before they destroyed it, but they started earlier than she thought, and so she went and it was gone. And so it was this really profound thing because we made this thing and we had finished it, and we had, anyway, so it's funny, she also had started doing these drawings with the tea leaves as a kind of experiment. She had been doing some experiments with it with other images, but she never really thought that they would last, like maybe it would fade or something, but they didn't. Like she kept it all sealed, like kind of like, Chinese scroll or something like that, and they all kind of like changed in hue, and some of them even deepened, but yeah, anyways, so I just wanted to end with this last part here. In the North Indian classical dance form Kathak, the Urdu word riyaz means training or practice, a kinetic and ritualistic practice engaged with the devotion and surrender to nada, the sound, tone, and pulse of life in music and dance. Riyaz is also a garden, the threshold that connects the dancer to the sacred and profane. For the eminent translator of Swedish literature, Joan Tate, the translator of a book is closer to the farmer than to the writer, more of a cultivator rather than an inventor. I would add that poetry and its translation thrive with the balance of cultivation and invention, along with a measure of possession, each nurturing the other, each tuned to the nada of Riyaz in their single pursuit of the earthly and ineffable sea anya, or flower-covered grove. So, thank you.